speaking of Yiddish and the Yiddish theater in Eastern Europe led to the creativity of this industry. And I think that have any of you been to Steven Spielberg's mother's restaurant?
Yeah.
Okay, well then if you've met Steven Spielberg's mother, then you've also met Tzipora. And there's a real commonality there. And I think now that you've met Tzipora, my suspicion is you'll never forget her. And one of the really joyful things about knowing Dan and Ravit is that many times over the last couple of years, we've spent time together, and they've referred obliquely to this project. But as they were working on it, they never really were able to convey to me what they had accomplished, the greatness of what they had accomplished. And you're going to hear from them now, and I think you'll probably get a sense of the tremendous humility and respect they have for what they've done here. And we now all bear the burden of carrying the memory of Tzipora and the movement that she was such a vivid part of. And so we're now, in that sense, very important in keeping this alive. So thank you both for making this movie, and now ask your questions of Dan and Ravit.
Yes.
So how did you come to make this project, and why did you make it?
Why did I make it? Sometimes you stumble upon a human story that just must be told, and then you got to tell it. How did I stumble upon it? My mom always told me never speak to strangers on the subway. I guess that didn't sink in, and then I was vacationing, like I said, for a week in New York. Stumbled upon this little old Jewish lady. She said, "Come see my Yiddish play." I come from Israel. I have a lot of bias towards Yiddish. I had a lot of issues towards Yiddish. My grandmother was actually in this very militant youth organization that was trying to kill Yiddish in the whole country. Basically in Israel, at the formation of the state, and even before the formation of the state, kids, they had like the Boys and Girl Scouts, but the whole objective of the Boys and Girl Scouts was just walking the streets and not let anybody speak Yiddish. And they would hand you a note, you should be ashamed of yourself. And then, so I grew up, not knowing anything about it or not liking people who spoke it. I didn't like them, and then I didn't even meet anyone who spoke Yiddish. And then I stumbled upon Tzipora. I wish I could say that I'm like Jerry Seinfeld in Seinfeld, but I'm more like Kramer. I stumble upon these characters, and I just go on their journey, and I just fell in love with her, and I said, you know what, I want the world to know about her story.
So why did it take so long? I mean, most of this was shot in 2000.
Right, so there was about 8 days of shooting, 40 days of editing, and then 7 years of waiting.
Waiting for what?
Fundraising, the money just took a long, long time. It's not an easy project to get funding for, and a lot of people say, oh, Yiddish, there must be so many rich Jews who want to give to that, but we found out it's not the case. I think a lot of people have a problematic relationship with Yiddish. They would support, like we show in the movie, they would support Chinese cinema, kabuki, whatever, but when it comes to our own, they have some issues with it, and it wasn't easy to get money for it. Surprising as it may sound, most of the money came from Israel, from a governmental fund, because Dan is a very famous filmmaker there. And some came from a few donors in the U.S. One is Jonah Goldrich, who really is a very important person for the memory of the Holocaust and for keeping Yiddish culture alive, and he believed in this film and still does.
Ravit, how did you get involved?
So, like Dan, I'm a graduate of the Film and TV Department of Tel Aviv University, and Dan is just one of our most famous grads. So when I moved to LA 5 years ago, I just gave him a call because he was already living here. And I said, I'm new in Hollywood, where do I go, what do I do? And he said, oh, I'm working on this movie about Yiddish theater, you've got to come be the producer on it. And of course I said, nope, I didn't come to Hollywood to make documentaries, I don't speak a word of Yiddish because I'm an Israeli. And he said, please, please, just watch the footage and see what you think. And I watched the footage, 4 days, 100 hours, and I just fell in love with Tzipora. And I felt this is a great human story that should be told and will be of great interest to anyone. And I was very naive because I just moved here. I was like, oh, in no time, we get some money, we cut, we edit, we're out the door, we move on to the big Hollywood film. 5 years later, here I am. It took some time, but it was a wonderful journey. It was worth every moment.
I think one of the things is, we live in a society today that, just like Ronnie says, in a society that worships youth. And basically, I think we're brainwashed on a daily basis, by all the advertising industry about you need to have everything new. You need a new car, you need a new husband, a new wife, a new skin, a new soul, a new brain, a new you. And I think trying to sell people on the idea, there's a movie about this old lady trying to keep an old culture alive, was very hard for some people. But at the end of the day, this is a story about a Jewish culture, but I think it's true for any culture. I mean, we've been lucky that for some of our screening, we had a guy that just was visiting from China. He walked here on the street and he saw the sign and it looked interesting, and he said, look, in China we have the same issues. We have older cultures that are disappearing, and also the Chinese culture is trying, in a way they're influenced by, the internet, by the media. They're also trying to kind of imitate the Western world, so they're also, in a way, kind of pushing aside everything that is old. But I think sometimes there's so much knowledge and so much depth in that which is old. So I think even though we can't just stagnate and stay still, and we have to move forward. But I think we always have to look forward with respect and with a little knowledge of the past.
I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I mean, structurally, even as a film, I don't even know where to start. I saw a review outside and I was like, oh my god. I mean, not only was the lead character, the protagonist, and Zipporah amazing, but all the subplots, Schiffer was just amazing. It was so funny. I mean, at times it almost reminded me of like a Christopher Guest film, but even better, because it was real and you weren't, and it's just like, yeah, and better. And like Ronnie, I fell in love with her. I think it was so refreshing to see a young, beautiful, like Israeli actress, so smart and just, it's interesting because the other day I was watching like Brian Grazer on TV, and I went to USC, so he's an alum. So every time he talks, I just want to throw up because all he talks about is like how much money. There's a lot of talk, I think, among Hollywood of how much money the films gross. Right. And I think one of the most amazing things about film that's gotten lost, especially living in LA, is the magic of filmmaking. Just the film itself, like films make money, they don't make money, but you rarely just hear a person talk about like the magic of it, and once you start getting into the money and the production value and all that stuff, it kind of loses something. And so it was really actually amazing just artistically watching these people so consumed and absorbed in really just the theatrics of what they did. I mean, these were actors, and even though they needed money, they couldn't breathe. I mean, it was like breath to them. It was like their life, and you don't see that among actors today. So that was just like so refreshing and amazing to see, and I think very invigorating as a writer and as an actor. I'm not an actor, but as a writer, and just for anyone to see this film, doesn't matter if you're Jewish or not, but anyone remotely artistic, I think this would be incredibly inspiring to them. It's just amazing.
She was definitely an inspiration for us.
It's just so life-affirming.
Thank you. One of the interesting things I asked, there's a theater owner in New York that was a child star, and he saw the movie, and I asked him, how come there used to be 12 successful Broadway Yiddish theaters in New York that were actually making a lot of money. Zipporah had the one theater that was not making any money, and yet her theater is the one that survived, and the other 12, which were big and famous and had a lot of publicity, they all vanished. He said exactly what you kind of said. What happened with all of them, they were very commercial, and the minute they started losing money, they're just investors bailed out, and they just disappeared. And Zipporah had this passion to keep her theater alive, and since she was never making money, she could not really lose money. And that's why her theater survived, and now it's going into the Volksbühne is the last remaining Yiddish theater in the States, and it's entering its 83rd year.
And it's alive and kicking, thanks to her tenacity.
More question?
So again, I thought it was wonderful. Indeed, it had such a universal appeal. Even in Europe, we're losing all these little languages, and we've been losing so many of them. So. Wonderful story. You really only to spend 8 days with her,
yeah.
So you got all this.
Yeah.
Oh, because she died.
How'd you get the weather to comply?
Yeah. Because you had. Was it serendipitous? Because it seems like a lot of things happened between her being on the verge of shutting down her theater and the money raising, and her unfortunately dying. When did she die?
Well, she didn't die within the 8 days.
Yeah,
but what's amazing,
that would have been
then we did come back to shoot her dying and all that. But what's amazing with Dan is that the moment he turns his camera towards anything,